Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Between Two Friends. And today is a special episode, meaning we have a very special guest, Martha Bueno. Martha, thank you so much for joining. You are so active on Twitter, on social media. You're active in the community. I know you're already elected to the council in West Kendall. And now you're running for county commissioner, lifelong entrepreneur. I've known about you for a long time. And when this issue came up, it was just perfect. Today we're talking Cuba. We're talking all things Cuba, and you are especially vocal. And there's a lot more I want to say, but first of all, welcome and thank you so much for jumping on with us today.
Thank you so much for having me and for doing this talk and talking about Cuba. I think it's so needed, especially within our community.
So for me, I didn't grow up in Miami, so I still have a lot of friends sort of back west, if you will. It's so hard for people that don't live in Miami to understand the Cuban influence. Like Miami is just Cuba of the North, if you will. Like the Cuban influence is ingrained in politics, in food, in lifestyle, and culture. I mean, it basically is, the Miami community. And so I think that's hard for people to really understand that don't live here. Do you think?
I think so. I think people don't generally realize how prevalent Cuban culture is here. But I mean, you can live in Miami and not speak a word of English, and live comfortably. And I think that's something that people who aren't from Miami don't realize. This is pretty much not just Cuban, we're a Latin American community. And I think, Cuba kind of is the headquarters for what's going on in Venezuela and Nicaragua. So it's such an important topic.
That just gives some of the context. And in fact, if you live in Miami, this building. It's right across from American Airlines Arena, the Freedom Tower. But so many families crossed the waters, got to the shore, and started in this building. I mean, there's just thousands of stories of people saying, my parents were there, my grandparents, etc.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Miami, everywhere in Miami, right? There's landmarks, Cuban landmarks all over Miami. Pequeña Habana, Little Havana is a great example. It's in the heart of Miami, and it's Cuban all the way, from the food to the music to just everything. People who live there. I mean, again, this community is just Hispanic.
Overwhelming. So let's jump into it. So SOS Cuba, like what is that? Let's explain that to people.
So I think we have to start pretty far back. SOS Cuba started on July 11th. But before that, we've had a regime for 62 years, a communist regime in Cuba for 62 years. And this isn't the first uprising in Cuba, but it is the biggest one we've seen. And it started just before that uprising with the musicians, and it's called El Movimiento San Isidro. There is a law in Cuba that being a musician, being an artist, and presenting your art without the government's permission is a crime. Same as being a journalist if you're not sanctioned by the government. There's a lot of crimes in Cuba that people in America would be shocked to think about. I mean, Cuba's an island, right? And you'd think, well, how are they starving? They could just go and fish. Well, you're not allowed to fish in Cuba. You're not allowed to eat whatever you catch. So there's a lot of these laws that just over time, people have gotten fed up. And the issue with Cuba is they didn't really have access to the outside world. What people don't realize is they only got access to the internet, the general population of Cuba, because if you're part of the government, you had it before, in 2018. What happened in 2018? They started allowing cell phones and internet connections and Wi-Fi. And so people who have been living in a closed community, picture, I don't want to say North Korea, but something along those lines, where they really didn't have much interaction with the outside world. They're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to consume content from really outside. They started consuming the content. They started getting on Facebook. They started seeing that the rest of the world has these freedoms that they don't have. And it started a snowball effect. I'm sure if you live in Miami, you've heard the song Patria y Vida by Cuban artists. And before, the regime would have never allowed that song on the island. And then it became an emblematic song for everyone, not only here, but there as well. And so these little things have started pushing people to the breaking point. And then, of course, there's COVID. And, people have been told to quarantine and to social distance, but then you have to make a line every day or you don't eat. So just these many factors came together. And on the 11th of July of this year, people started protesting in Cuba. And this is the first time that we've seen protests all around the country all at once. And that's probably been pushed by the internet. Before, you wouldn't be able to connect, and find out, oh, somebody else is protesting, let's go do it. It broke out throughout the island. It continues to break out. There's constant, protests and whatnot going on in the island. They have been suppressed quite a bit. And the reason is people, it's a brutal regime. They will take you to jail. They will lock you up. And they do give really harsh sentences for protesting. We know of over 800 people that have gone missing or disappeared. Plenty of people in jail, plenty of even young kids, younger than 18, given year sentences for protesting, for the crime of protesting against the regime. So we're looking at a situation that is so unique around the world, where you go to jail for a year for protesting against your government. And meanwhile, your government isn't able to fulfill your basic needs. Even Díaz-Canel, the president of Cuba, has now admitted that the hospitals are collapsing. They have no oxygen for patients. They don't have very many meds. So this world superpower, supposedly, of healthcare, of free healthcare, of government-run healthcare, is completely over their head. So, how this crisis ends, we don't know, but it is certainly a crisis.
So let's back up for a second. I'm sure everyone gets at this point that Cuba is a communist country. You had Castro come in with force, by the way. People didn't just like sign up for communism and have all their rights taken away. Use of guns. The only way to enforce communism is through military power. A terrible, inhumane, awful situation in Cuba all these years. Universal health care, that's being debunked. And it's important for a lot of reasons. You mentioned Venezuela and some other countries right now. There's little smatterings, and I don't think this will ever go away in the world. But here's the part that I don't understand, and I think it's hard for people to understand it. And my friends, a lot of my Cuban friends will say, like, the only way that it'll ever fix is it fixes itself from within, from the island. And of course, heard the Bay of Pigs, but like, if the US spends so much time and billions of dollars to protect democracy around the world, why can't we take care of this little situation 90 miles away? That's the part that's super complicated, that it's hard to understand.
It is hard to understand, but also I think I can't support the United States invading Cuba. That's just not something that I think any Cuban wants either. Because the reason that Castro came to power was this anti-American sentiment to begin with, right? So now the United States is just going to invade, and then what? I do agree that it has to come from within, but people fail to see that there's over 1.5 million Cubans who have left the island. And so the United States blocks us, people who are Cubans who want to help, from going to the island. It was a proclamation instituted by Bill Clinton in 1996, Proclamation 6867, which basically makes it a crime for any US citizen to leave any port in the United States going towards Cuba with the intention of making it into Cuban territorial waters. So that, to me, is a huge problem with the United States. They should not be telling free people what we can and can't do.
Why was that law put into place? Like, why? What was the purpose?
The Brothers to the Rescue plane downing. So there was this group of Cubans who would take their small planes. They were pilots, and they would take their planes and distribute leaflets over Cuban territory. So they drop leaflets out of the plane. And one of those flights, Cuban military shot down the plane. And so in order to, quote, protect other people from going there and possibly being killed, we now have this law in place. And the fines are rather large. I believe it's about $20,000 a day fine, plus confiscation of your vessel, and up to 10 years in prison. So it's actually less sentence if you pick up a Cuban and bring him to the United States. It's a 5-year jail sentence. And I think it's like $250,000 plus, confiscation of your vessel. So why? If you risk your life going to Cuba to provide help or provide some sort of aid, it's almost not worth coming back.
First of all, if you know the risk and you choose to help, then it should be your decision, right? Your risk.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure like, since you risk your life, we're going to throw you in jail for 10 years. I was in federal court one time watching a sentencing for a guy who had smuggled some people out of Cuba, and he didn't apologize to the judge. And the judge is like, well, the law, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know, he took his sentence, and humanity, like he is a hero, basically.
It's the equivalent of, you know, the whole situation, like the people who hid Anne Frank, that was against the law. You
Right.
know, we have to look at what's going on in Cuba. People are dying. I have a person that I've met recently over the internet in Cuba who has cystic fibrosis. He's 26 years old. He can't even get the oxygen to keep him alive. He can't get the medicines he needs. To me, risking going to Cuba to get somebody like that out and to safety and to be able to get medical care is almost like a no-brainer. You know, why are we being punished for trying to help? And then, you know, we were talking earlier about the United States and what they can do. We don't need them to intervene militarily, but they can provide peacekeeping troops so that the government of Cuba doesn't continue to abuse the people. They could provide humanitarian aid. They, of course, the Cuban government will steal humanitarian aid, which is a big problem that we have getting people help. But there are things we can do to help. And, you know, the United States providing it would be a completely different thing than you and I, you know, individuals trying to help. If the United States sent military humanitarian aid, I think it would reach the people. And you see, we're trying to provide them with Wi-Fi now, and even that's a struggle. You know, they've been promising Wi-Fi almost an entire month, and it hasn't happened. When after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, we were able to provide Wi-Fi almost instantly for the entire island. So it is a curious case why the United States isn't helping more. I'd love to have an answer to that. I just don't know.
You know, we're preventing people themselves from, you know, basically taking a boat within close international waters and projecting, you know, radio signals, right? Like, there's so many creative ways that I've heard people want to help, but they can't. So how, and people in Cuba don't have guns, right? So if there's an uprising, how would this ever end? How would the people, how would the Cuban people basically take to the streets and overthrow a government? How does this not, you know, 150 years from now, they're in the exact same spot?
Yeah, and that's what we've seen. You know, 27 years ago, we had El Maleconazo, which was another uprising. And so for almost 30 years now, people have been rising up in Cuba and nothing changes. And how does this end? I don't know. I do believe that peacekeeping troops would keep the government, at least from hurting their own people. And like I said, there's so many creative ways. We could use drones to drop things for people. We could do all sorts of things. How does it end? Good question. I wish I knew. We believe that Raul Castro at this moment is probably deceased. And so that would be a huge blow to the Cuban government, which is probably why they're not going to tell us anytime soon. They're very secretive. Right. So again, I wish I had the answer. Probably it's going to take people from the outside delivering guns to the people in the inside, to be honest. I can't imagine any other way to defeat a government of, you know, that has military grade weapons. I don't know.
Yeah, people need to understand and to see that the idea behind universal healthcare. Do I wish that universal healthcare was easy and that it, like, they would just snap our fingers and everybody would have great healthcare? Of course, we all want better healthcare for everybody, but, you know, government force and it's just not possible. But
government doesn't do a whole lot well. You know, anybody who's ever gotten a driver's license who had to wait in line at a DMV, right, you know, that government just isn't the right person. I'm, you know, again, as a libertarian, I agree with you. I think everybody should have access to quality healthcare. I have a problem with the government being the one to provide it. Free market always works better. You know, it's just a matter of, we have a hard time envisioning what that would look like. I think that's the problem. People have a hard time envisioning, if it's not free, if it's not provided by the government, what would it be? In Cuba, it is provided by the government and it is, quote, free, but you can't get access to anything. And if you want access to those things, you have to pay for them. Yeah. Medicine, you know, azithromycin, which here in the United States, you know, I've just bought boxes of it to send to Cuba and it was $8 for a treatment. And in Cuba, selling for over $300. Wow. So free healthcare is just one of those myths that it sounds great, Sounds wonderful.
I have friends in who are Canadian who complain all the time, and then people come here for procedures, right? Because
Right.
you can't ever get access to things. Like if we took down, a lot of regulations and you had more doctors' offices, they would have to innovate like most people within, who are entrepreneurs within the free enterprise system have to do. But we have these laws basically in healthcare to keep drugs expensive and to limit, unfortunately, competition. And it basically government gets in the way of improvements because of
Could you imagine if Amazon ran our healthcare? I mean, we'd get it overnight and shipped to our door is all I'm saying. We have companies that have proven that, and I think it's hard for a lot of people that weren't born before the internet was a big deal. People before,
Yeah.
the 2000s don't realize that we didn't have the comfort of ordering from our cell phones and having stuff just magically arrive at our front doors.
Yeah.
And so, government was a big reason why that was not able to happen, and there was a huge issue in that field. Stores that had to pay taxes and had to pay rent and overhead and all this, Amazon competed with them. These are the type of things that government just kind of gets in the way. And their solution to the problem of the competition was, well, let's tax Amazon as well. So, I mean, government generally has these really terrible solutions to problems, such as the case of healthcare.
So there are people like you who care, who this thing's not going away in Cuba, and who are innovative and coming up with ways to help. So, and I know you and I were talking about it earlier, so tell us about that.
Right. So there's a lot of people that want to help and we feel helpless. How do we help when we can't really get aid into Cuba? So the traditional routes, if we buy containers and ship containers of medicine to Cuba, the government confiscates that. The only way to get medicine into Cuba is to send it directly to the people. So we're starting up with People for Liberty. I'm starting up an initiative to basically an adopt a family style system, where we identify people in Cuba who, number one, don't have family anywhere else, because people who have family outside of Cuba can get medicine shipped directly by their family. So number one criteria is people who don't have family outside of Cuba. And then number two, because we just won't be able to do, we want to make sure that we can focus on the people that are most needy. We're working only with people who have real diseases that need medicine, or the elderly, which is a huge group in Cuba that can't get access to the things they need. And so what we're doing is raising funds here in the United States, and as well as accepting donations of vitamins, supplements, medical equipment, anything that people can and want to give that we can ship to Cuba. And what we can do is send 22 pounds maximum per person a month to Cuba. That's government imposed by the Cuban government, by the way. I wish I could send 100 pounds of medicine to everyone.
Sure.
22 pounds, and we get it directly into their hands.
That's amazing. Second of all, thank you for actually doing something, not just posting something on Facebook and calling yourself an activist. Third, tell us is there a website? How do we find more information? I'm going to sign up. I'm absolutely going to help monetarily, and I hope a lot of other people do as well.
Thank you so much. You actually caught me just before we launch. People for Liberty will have a landing page directly for this service. We will have, people's information that you can see who the medicine is going towards, and we will have a site to collect the funds.
By the time we post this, we'll have it, and we'll post it right here on the screen. So
perfect. Thank you,
Martha. Keep up the good work. Your energy is incredible, and God bless you and the Cuban people. And man, hopefully someday this resolves. I mean, that's the only thing we could do. Keep working it, and let's see how it goes.
Thank you so much, and thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care, Martha. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.